What's up guys, Chris from SOFLETE here with another weekly training tip. This week we are talking about Ruck Programming 101. So before we get started, some things that we want to talk about when we frame this discussion. If you are considering training for anything that is high mileage, heavy load, high variability, this is for you. This is to highlight a proposed training methodology, all right? Some things you want to take into consideration before you begin your training. First off, how much time do I have to train? How much history do I have training? Do I ruck on a regular basis? Do I have a history of following a periodized training program? What kind of lifestyle do I live? Do I eat? Do I sleep enough? Do I have enough time and enough support in my day in order to accommodate a high volume training load? And the biggest question that you guys have to identify when you're getting ready for these events: what are you training for? Understand that in a lot of military selection events or Go Ruck events, you might not know every single individual exercise. However, it's always important to go into your training having a good understanding of what it is you need to work on. As a principle, training is meant to address your weaknesses, not just reinforce your strengths. So, what we're talking about when we talk about rucking is how do I incorporate rucking as an evaluative tool in my training? Not to get too nerdy on anyone, but to understand why we're advocating for the amount of rucks that we do throughout our 12-week training cycle is understanding the benefits of concentric versus eccentric training, right? In short, loaded eccentric movement. When I put a rucksack on my back and I start walking, there's a loaded eccentric movement that happens. Prolonged exposure to loaded eccentric movement, because of the muscle fiber recruitment patterns, can lead, especially in untrained people, DOMs and potential muscle damage. So we're not saying don't ruck in your training, we're saying sparingly ruck in your training. Along with that, we want to focus on building a good level of mobility and durability by using our back squat, power clean, bench press, and deadlifts. If you had to focus on 4 things in your lifting during this training cycle, focus on those 4 lifts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a basic 12-week breakdown leading up to your selection event. Again, all determines by these specific factors and how they apply to you. So for the first part, what I want to point out before I start is mobility goes across the entire board. Everyone here who rucks for a living has to be able to move well. We're not just talking about increasing flexibility, we're talking about increasing flexibility, stability, range of motion, etc., right? We want to be able to prepare our bodies to receive higher loads of volume as we progress through the training cycle. So, weeks 1 through 3, if you are brand new getting off the couch, spend a good amount of time focusing on mobility. Prepare your body to receive volume. Weeks 1 through 3 focuses on low volume conditioning. Start running a little bit, jog around your block. When it comes to the strength portion of your workouts, depending on where you're starting from, if you're brand new to lifting, focus on some unilateral work. This means focusing on one leg or the other leg rather than both legs at one time, which is a bilateral movement. Now, that's not saying you shouldn't do both. All I'm saying is that when you start as a training principle, unilateral to bilateral, simple to complex. That's how we progress through our training. For here, we are talking less than or equal to 1 short distance ruck march. Again, rucking is an evaluative tool. Important that you need to get good at it, obviously, because you want to pass your selection. However, because we're early on in our training cycle, use this technique sparingly. Moving on down the line, we look at weeks 4 and 5, right? So now we are at low to mid volume of conditioning. We're starting to build our conditioning up towards a climax in our training cycle. For now, if we have a good understanding and good foundation of unilateral movement, bilateral movement becomes our primary. Again, the difference of a unilateral lunge versus a bilateral back squat. Unilateral, nonetheless, because of the muscle recruitment that happens in ruck marches, becomes a supplementary movement. Our rucking now maybe increases, depending on how weeks 1 through 3 feel, maximum of 1 maybe 2 ruck marches per week, 1 short, 1 long, depending on what you're training for. Moving on in our training cycle, week 6 and 7, depending on how everything is going, we are now to mid to high volume of conditioning. This is strength, this is stamina, doesn't matter, we're increasing the load as we go. Bilateral movement is still our primary, unilateral movement is still our supplements. We are still only 2 rucks per week. Include some variation in your ruck marches. We're not saying don't get out there. Do short distance, do long distance, maybe a ruck run, try something off-road. This is where you really want to try to peak in your training, is about 7 weeks into it. Now, very important training principle. Come week 8, depending on how much you've accumulated up to now it's time for what we call a deload. As a training principle that you should always keep in mind, remember, you do not get bigger, stronger, faster when you do all this. You get bigger, stronger, faster when you recover from working out. So scheduling in a recovery period or a deload period to help those muscles heal is going to be very important as you consider to ramp back up in your training. Weeks 9 and 11, depending on where we're at, where the success of our retest that we applied to our gates, whatever we're training for back over here, we're now back to low to mid volume, ramping ourselves back up into our training cycle. Bilateral movement is still our primary, unilateral movement is still our supplementary, and we're using maybe 2 rucks per week to kind of cap off our training. This is a 12-week training cycle template, concludes with a week 12 recover. All right, you want to show up to your event in peak shape. You don't want to peak all the way back here and then be broken by the time you get over here, right? You want to continue ramping yourself up, culminating in week 12. After week 12, crush it. This is where your event happens. High mileage, heavy load, high variability. Again, guys, this is a basic 12-week outline for any sort of ruck-based selection program, whether it's a Go Ruck, whether it's SFAS, whether it's Ranger School, it doesn't matter. Understand these principles of low volume to high volume, unilateral to bilateral. Again, stay low, stay consistent with the ruck marches. We wish you guys the best of luck, whatever you decide to do. For more information, click the subscribe button on the YouTube link below. Follow us on Instagram at SOFLETE HQ, and we'll hit you with more information next week.